Sue, you told me a good story last night about they were trying to get the best reaction for you going under the water when the shark drags you down. And you were telling me, well, I guess you can tell the story again, how they did it as a sort of surprise so they can actually get a great reaction from you.
I told you this story last night. Where was I last night?
Yeah, you were saying that they were doing a couple of rehearsals, and then you kind of got.
They didn't warn you.
They didn't warn you.
Oh, that was that was when I was. I told Stephen if he'd give me an hour with special effects, I could figure out how I was going to do the rigging, what I was going to do, and I wouldn't waste his time on set when they got 100 people there. Well, they had an electric winch, and I didn't want to use it because if it overrode, I was in big trouble. So that didn't go over real big, but we did it with cables after all.
Yeah, but we had 6 guys, 2 on each, you know. We just ran real fast.
Yeah, they had to work, not me. I'm just in there for the ride.
Well, you did incredible.
And then you know the screaming and the water in the lungs and everything is in looping. You know, long after the film is finished, when we go back to fix the sound, you came in with a styrofoam cup of water that they poured down her throat while she screamed.
Started waterboarding. For artistic purposes.
Jeff, do you have any remembrances of Roy Scheider working with Roy on that film?
I do. Roy Scheider is a good guy on that movie, and I really have a lot of remembrances of Murray Hamilton, who I really loved. Murray kept a bottle of gin in my boot. Jaws 2, he had gone to gin and milk, which was really good. But he was the consummate actor. He was married to one of the DeMarco sisters. He was such a special guy. And do you want to tell the story of the kitty?
Every evening after shooting and after dinner, Murray would go out for a cocktail or a bottle. And on the way home to the hotel, if he didn't have a call the next morning, if he didn't have to be up early, and sometimes even if he had to be up early, it didn't matter. He was a professional. He could work with a hangover. He was walking home late at night on the streets of Martha's Vineyard, finding his way back to the hotel. There's a little kitty cat playing in the alley, and he bent over to stroke the kitty and said, "Hey, kitty, kitty, kitty," and the kitty was nice. And then he continued and he walked into the lobby of the hotel, and the night clerk gagged and wretched because Murray had petted a skunk. So Murray goes up to his room and closes the door and notices a terrible stench because he's taking his clothes off now, and his clothes are just reeking in a pile over here. So he can't sleep. He says, "There's something terribly wrong in my room." And in the logic of, in 120 proof logic, he decided, well, I'll just get a blanket and sleep down in the lobby of the hotel on a couch, where they found him in the morning, and they had to burn his clothes and wash him in tomato juice, which is, when you were like a dog, who's been playing with a skunk. And then he made it to the set on time, and it didn't cost us a minute of shooting, but it did provide us with many hours of happy stories.
And Joe talked about the production. The production saved and helped many businesses on Martha's Vineyard. It came in early in the season, supposed to be out by the time the season started, but of course they went through the season into after season again, and a lot of romances started there.
We're going to talk about that now.
Joe? Now see, now you know it was about him. I wasn't going to say a word. I was just going to be nice.
Yeah, well,
She was over 18. No, 18.
there were a lot more women on the island than there were men, so they kept our guys pretty busy.
Especially the effects guys that made the teeth of Jaws. We made those things, and the effects guys, Roy Abergash, who was ahead of that, he said, because they would break, so you'd have to have new ones put in. He says, I don't know, I'm missing all these teeth. Well, the guys were stealing them and go to the bars and tell the girls, hey, I got a Jaws tooth here.
They were like a get into bed free chip.
Oh,
If you were in Las Vegas, it would have to be a pink $1,000 chip. If you were on Martha's Vineyard the summer of '74, you had a shark tooth. Worked the same way with the ladies.
Could we have a mechanical shark story?
Yeah, we got a lot of mechanical shark stories.
It didn't work.
We were testing. We were testing, and the problem, well, we had 3 sharks, right to left, left to right, and it took a while to get everything together. The platform shark, that was the one that would sink. It was very, very complicated. There were so many complicated things. The orca too. Bob had these barrels, and you would turn the barrels over, and they'd fill with water. That would sink. That was how the platform worked. So, you can't underestimate what water does to electrolysis.
Especially salt water. The ocean
Salt
eats
just
everything.
eats it up. And you think, well, we're all so smart, we know about water. Well, Eisenhower planned Battle of Normandy, and they didn't do so well either because they kind of, and the water was rough and they were losing people. It was very, very difficult, but the basic thing was the time element. We started shooting in May, and then it was like, where's the shark? Where's the shark? And I had storyboarded everything, which I'm selling those. And we planned it really tight. So I think Verna and I, and we talked about this stuff. I had made these barrels for the boat, painted them yellow. And so then the barrels became the shark. And even the barrels were not easy. If you were going to do a barrel going down, the day before you had to take and drop a 2,000-pound weight so you could put a shiv down there. So everything had to be difficult. If you have a shark here, and you have a boat here, and you have an effects here, you've got 3 or 4 boats to anchor. You have to anchor them at 4 different points so they don't twist around. So if you go out there at 7 to shoot, you're lucky if you get anything by 11 or 12.
And then the sun starts shifting in the sky, and to get the light correct, you've got to move all the boats around. So if the sun was on the left in the morning, it's still got to be on the left in the afternoon. That means lifting 4 anchors for every boat, because you're anchoring them at 4 quarters to hold them steady.
Yeah, what's that big
resetting.
water world they made for how many trillions of dollars? I mean, and they were talking about, and there was something else that I didn't realize when I scouted it, and Stephen was very firm on this. He didn't want to see anything in the background. Well, in the winter, there were no boats out there. In the summer, they were all coming from Johannesburg and all over. And some of them, we would be able to send boats out and say, would you mind sending over here? Other people just did it to get in the way. So that's why on Jaws 2, we went down to Florida.
On land, when you're shooting, your second ADs and assistants go out with walkie-talkies, and they close off both ends of the street, and they hold the traffic. And so all the cars on the street are your cars, and you place them where you want, you do what you need. When you're shooting on the ocean, and there's a boat 11 miles away, completely obvious on the horizon, you can't just send a PA with a radio whizzing out in a Boston whaler. It takes 2 hours to get to the horizon.
Today we could have done it in CGI.
You paint them out in CGI.
Joe says they went to Florida so they wouldn't have the problem. We had nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in the background. It's hard to tell them to stop.
Or to turn around, because that takes half a day.
Was the climax of Jaws the ending? Was it in the finished version? Was it close to what you had written?
Yes. I mean,
absolutely.
that was the thing. It was, it's funny. There's a show on television called Mythbusters, and they busted the myth of the exploding air tank, and so scientifically, it doesn't work. But in the context of the movie, with the proper setup, and Hooper saying, "Be careful of those," and all the attention that was paid to them. By the time or Brody employs the breathing tank as a homemade bomb, and shoots it, she's shooting at the shark. He hits the tank. the audience completely buys it.
Yeah,
nobody
yeah,
ever
yeah,
said
yeah.
that wouldn't happen.
We used squid. We had a lot of squid there. So we would fill up the explosive tanks with squid, so it looked like pieces of the shark. So when the shark comes up into the cabin, I had tied pieces of squid on the teeth. Stephen says, "What the heck's that?" I said, "Well, that's Quint. A little bit of Quint."
I think we should throw it open for questions because
Yes,
we can go on for years as we have.
No, that's a plan. So, next, does anyone have questions?
Oh yeah,
I have one for Carl.
Sure.
The Robert Shaw scene in the Indianapolis, how
Yes.
did that come about?
Really interesting. I'll be as brief as I can. In 1961, a book was written called Shark Attack, which described the sinking of the Indianapolis, including a scene in which a guy is bitten in half and turns upside down and is discovered by his shipmate. Later on, Howard Sackler, who had rewritten Peter Benchley's first draft. The Indianapolis speech, by the way, is not in the novel. It's only in the movie. And Quint's monomaniacal obsession with sharks, we thought had to be explained. So Howard Sackler, who wrote the intervening draft between Peter Benchley and me, Sackler was a Navy guy. He knew about the Indianapolis. He knew about the thing. So he cobbled together this long speech that gives Quint a reason to hate sharks. Everybody was afraid of it because it's a 2-page chunk of dialogue, which is very unusual for movies. Very rarely in a movie do you see an actor or character talk for that long. And Shaw was nervous about it. Stephen was nervous about it. Stephen had never directed a long dialogue scene like that. And a director who had directed Shakespeare and soliloquies might have been comfortable with it, but Stephen was a young guy.
Shaw was nervous about that?
Shaw was nervous about it too. Everybody was, because it's the equivalent of an aria in an opera, where one person steps forward, takes the stage, and tells the most dramatic story of the movie. So Stephen was asking everybody, all his writer friends, besides me. I was there writing, and he was asking everybody, Bob Zemeckis, Bob Gale, Paul Schrader, John Milius, all these people, he called them and asked them for advice. Everybody sent in suggestions. Milius dictated a few lines over the phone, and then and we were still worried. The day was approaching when we were going to have to shoot that because there was less and less left to shoot. So Shaw one evening comes to dinner with Stephen, myself, and Verna Fields and Dick Zanuck, and with a sheaf of papers in his hand. He's gotten all the research, he's gotten all the material, he's got the historical background on the Indianapolis. He says, "I think I've got that speech now." And he read it to us that he had written, basically putting together all the elements of my scripts and Howard Sackler's script. None for Milius, by the way.
Who takes credit?
Who takes credit. And I'm touchy about that, and there's an end note in the Jaws log which details the story completely. In any case, Shaw, who was a playwright and a novelist, a very accomplished writer in his own right, kind of assembled that speech as an actor would, put it together for himself to read. And then when we were shooting it on the first day, he drank too much. And by the end of the day, he was slurring his words and making up parts of it. He had forgotten his own dialogue. He apologized to Stephen. Stephen said, "We're here 2 days. Tell me you'll do it sober tomorrow. We'll come back tomorrow." He said that. He said it by, on his honor as an actor. He did, and he came back, and the Indianapolis speech on the second day was letter perfect. But there are some great moments from the first day that are in the movie. And because Verna Fields is such an editing genius, you can't tell what was the first day, what was the second day. And because you're here today, I'll give you the secret. If you watch it on Blu-ray, which is the only way to really see it in detail, if Shaw's eyes are watery in the close-up, it's from the drunk day. If his eyes are clear, it's from the second day. But it's such a masterful job of acting and directing and narrative that it's great. But and that's the story of the Indianapolis speech.
Another question? Sir, you're in the blue.
since you did most of the filming out on the ocean with a mechanical shark, did you guys ever have any problems or encounters with the real thing?
No, you know, on 2 we had some sharks circling, and people got a little panicked about it, but we really never had any trouble.
Yeah, that part of the world, in the 70s, white sharks were a rarity in the New England coast. They've been seen. The whole Jaws story is based on an incident that happened in New Jersey, in Cape May in 1916, where some people were killed by sharks. But they're not. They don't. You know, you don't see them. You know, it was not a problem for us. You know, we sand sharks, little sharks, no big deal. Though when I fell in the water, the first thought in my head was, you know, we're making a movie about sharks. Do the sharks know that I'm writing about them?
I'm from New Jersey, and I want to tell you, you did a good job in that movie, because I have been in the ocean since 1975. And I understand I'm not unique.
Oh no, we've all heard that ever since the movie came out. Like that.
Yes, Carl, how did it come about that you got cast as the unfortunate victim in the rowboat?
No, that's not me.
No.
Oh, wait, that was Ted Grossman.
That's Teddy Grossman. Ted Grossman was a stunt double and
Good friend of Dick Xanax.
a great boyhood friend of Dick Xanax, and a great stunt man.
Yeah.
That's Teddy's leg.
Oh.
All the way in the back.
How was Robert Shaw cast? How did he come to be cast?
Well, it was 2 weeks before production.
He was the third choice.
He was the third choice.
Richard Boone.
Richard Boone
Sterling
was one
Hayden.
for Sterling Hayden, and Lee Marvin, who turned the part down because Lee Marvin was actually fishing in Baja California and didn't want to. He sent back a telegram. Said, I'm fishing. I don't want to make a movie about fishing. I like fishing.
That didn't fish.
And Shaw was the only one who was not a fisherman.
Yeah, I mean, Boone was,
Sterling Hayden had been a great Grand Banks dory fisherman in his youth. He was the real deal.
So that's why he was like first choice.
So, but Shaw, Robert Shaw had been in the Sting for Zanuck and Brown, and they said, "Look, we really need an actor of your, ability and stature. So please do it. We'll pay you a lot of money, and if you go overtime, we'll pay you big penalties because we know you have other pictures waiting, and we know you'll have a tax problem if you work more than 90 days in the U.S." And as the picture dragged on and on, they started sending Shaw to Canada every day he was not working, so that he wouldn't pile up the days on his visa. And eventually, that strategy gave way, and Shaw was still on, and they paid a huge bump. As an actor, I think Shaw made more money than any other actor in the movie because of his penalties.
It would have been interesting. I'm just imagining Richard Boone in this movie.
Yeah.
The struggles to get him to show up.
Yeah, well...
Well, I worked a television series with Hank Ramsey. He's a pretty reliable person. Yeah. I liked him a lot.
And big rugged guy, which was needed for the character.
Yeah.
There's somebody all the way in the back, yes?
For Susan, do you recall the name of the stuntman who had recommended you for that crucial part?
Paul Stater. He did, what was the big boat movie that went down? Poseidon. And he did all kinds of water movies. He was also the first man to ever stand on an elephant's back for Tarzan.
Time for one more last question.
Lady. Yeah.
I have a question for everybody. You all had your little part in making the movie. When you saw it, what did you think?
I could only say this, because I was so closely tied to the shark, so to speak, that the crew would laugh. The shark made funny noises with the rams, and then they would laugh. And the longer we were on the island, they got island fever, they were crazy. I was concerned that the audience would laugh. And then when the first screening I saw in Long Beach, California, they didn't laugh. And wow.
Yeah.
I always like to think of it in a sense as the perfect storm. If you looked at it individually, you'd think this is going to be an unbelievable disaster. And when all these elements come together, and trust me, it doesn't happen often, but when they do, it just was the perfect storm. And you look at it in hindsight, and how blessed that the shark didn't work, so you didn't have to show it too much and maybe risk a laugh at it or whatever. But everything just worked out, and please don't think that this is the recipe for how to make these things, because trust me, it's not. And in this new corporate world where corporations own all the studios and everything, they would never permit a big studio film to go forward like this.
Yeah,
Kind of unprepared into the breach.
This was a small movie. We shot some in my driveway. We shot some in the editor's pool. They had coming out. I mean, as big as it was also very small. It was a small, relatively small group of people that were really bound together to get this thing made.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.
We just ran real fast.
Yeah, they had to work, not me. I was just in there for the ride.
Well, you did incredible.
And then you know the screaming and the water in the lungs and everything is in looping. You know, long after the film is finished, when we go back to fix the sound, you came in with a styrofoam cup of water that they poured down her throat while she screamed.
Started waterboarding.
Yeah.
For artistic purposes.
And then you kind of got.
They didn't warn you.
Didn't warn you.
Oh, that was
No warning.
that was when I was. I told Stephen if he'd give me an hour with special effects, I could figure out how I was going to do the rigging, what I was going to do, and I wouldn't waste his time on set when they had 100 people there. Well, they had an electric winch, and I didn't want to use it because if it overrode, I was in big trouble. So that didn't go over real big, but we did it with cables after all.
Yeah, but we had 6 guys, 2 on each, you know.
Sue, you told me a good story last night about they were trying to get the best reaction. You going under the water when the shark drags you down, and you were telling me, well, I guess you can tell the story again, how they did it as a sort of surprise so they can actually get a great reaction from you.
I told you this story last night. Where was I last night?
Yeah, you were saying that they were doing a couple of rehearsals.
The special guy. And do you want to tell the story of the kitty? Kitty.
Every evening after shooting and after dinner, Murray would go out for a cocktail or a bottle, and on the way home to the hotel, if he didn't have a call the next morning, if he didn't have to be up early, and he sometimes even if he had to be up early, it didn't matter. He was a professional. He could work with a hangover. He was walking home late at night on the streets of Martha's Vineyard, finding his way back to the hotel.
Jeff, do you have any remembrances of Roy Scheider working with Roy on that film?
I do. Roy Scheider is a good guy on that movie, and I really have a lot of remembrances of Murray Hamilton, who I really loved. Murray kept a bottle of gin in my boot. Jaws 2, he had gone to gin and milk, which was really good. But he was the consummate actor. He was married to one of the DeMarco sisters. He was such a